Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. So about a year ago, and I can't believe it's been a year, I thought it was just a few months ago, but 2024 has been a bit of a shit show for me. But about a year ago, I did a video swatching and showing you guys all of my best foundation matches. That video did really well. It was a pretty requested video, and I mentioned in that video that if you were interested, I could also do a companion video all about concealers. So it's a year later, I'm currently on a no-buy, so there are actually like one or two concealers I wanted to get for this video, but I just don't have. So starting off, I don't have a concealer from MAC. I like to compare to MAC because it's kind of the standard when it comes to shade ranges and shade numbers, so all I have is the foundation to compare against, but I've got like 10 actual concealers that I use specifically for my under eyes. I'm going to show you guys swatches of. I have two concealers I use for spot concealing, and then at the end I'll mix it up a little bit and throw in some color correctors. So before we jump in, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you like swatching videos like this on pale complexions, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit that bell icon so you're notified whenever a new video comes out every single week. Alright, so right now I have like no makeup on. I just threw a little bit of brow gel through my brows and in my lashes so I wouldn't look like totally unput together. But to start off, I'm going to swatch all of the concealers like near my under eye because that's typically where I conceal. And to start off, we're going to do just a little swatch of the MAC N4, which is the last time I got shade matched. I was a MAC N4, and looking at it, it still looks like a pretty decent shade match. So I don't use this for concealers, but it's kind of my closest reference. You guys can see like what an N4 is going to look like compared to the rest of these swatches. And I will have everything listed down below as well if you don't want to just listen to me spout off shade names and everything, but that's kind of the point of this video. So I hope you are comfy and you enjoy. So starting off number one, this has been like my favorite concealer recently. This is the Armani Luminous Silk Concealer. So it is a bit of a luxury one, but I love it. And this is in the shade 3.75. So as you can see, it's got a little bit of a rosy undertone, but this works out so well by helping to cancel out my dark circles. And honestly, the dark circles have gotten a lot better over the years as I've been consistent with my skincare, but this has worked so well and it looks beautiful like on my fine lines. It doesn't sink into them. It really hydrates my under eyes, and I can use this without setting it. It sets down a little bit, but not too much. It's just like that perfect in between. So this has been my regular go-to. This is the shade 3.75 compared to the MAC N4. Alright, next we have another oldie but a goodie. This is the Maybelline Instant Age Rewind Eraser. Now, this used to be my go-to, like, summer concealer, but I can only wear this when I set my concealer. I cannot leave this to set on its own. It will just crease and basically melt off my face. But this is in the shade 100 Ivory. So it's still a decent shade match for me right now, but as I've not been powdering my under eyes as much, I don't reach for this as often, but it is a really great summer sweat-proof concealer. Alright, next, this is a concealer I didn't really like the formula for, and I think it's a little too rosy. This is the Natasha Denona concealer, and it's in the shade... That's an excellent question. What shade are you? This is the High Glam concealer in the shade N1. So let's take a look at this bad boy. So yeah, as you can see, it is significantly darker than the rest of the swatches, and it's like really like too rosy. You see how like the Armani is like a bright kind of like more orangey rosy, if that makes sense, and the Natasha Denona, it's just too deep. I can't really use this as an under eye concealer unless I kind of darken my foundation or really go in with like the bronzer everywhere. But this one, I noticed just the formula wise in my fine lines doesn't work as well, but just so you guys have a reference, that's what the shade N1 looks like, and I think that might be the lightest shade. I will double check and put it right here, but I think this is the lightest shade they have in that High Glam concealer range. So we'll swatch one more on this eye before we move over to the other eye. And which one should we do? Let's do the IT Cosmetics Bye Bye Dark Spot. So I have the shade 12, Fair Warm. Now, this one, I highly recommend going in store to swatch, because I originally picked up the shade, the lightest shade in their line, shade 11 Fair Neutral, and the shades are vastly different. And I will swatch this when I'm doing spot concealing, but just so you guys can see, shade 11 being the lightest shade in the range. It's not actually like the lightest shade just because it's the lowest number. The lightest shade is actually shade 12. So this one actually works pretty decent. It's a little more yellowy than rosy, and I am leaning more towards rosy undertones when it comes to my under eye concealers now, but this one still works really, really nicely. So let's go through the swatches on this side of my cheek before we move on. First, we have just the MAC Studio Fix Fluid Foundation in the shade N4. Next, we have the Armani Luminous Silk Concealer in the shade 3.75. Next, we have the Maybelline Instant Age Rewind Eraser in the shade 100. Over here, we have the Natasha Denona High Glam Concealer in the shade 1N. And last but not least, we have the IT Cosmetics Bye Bye Dark Spots in the shade 12. So to start us off again on this side, I'm also going to just take a little swatch of the MAC N4 just so that you guys have a frame of reference when it comes to, and I just dropped that all over my desk. But I like having a shade of reference because with lighting and everything, shades can look very different, so I think it's just helpful in these kind of videos to have kind of like your neutral, not your neutral, but like, what is it called? Your reference point. Okay, so let's start out with an oldie but another goodie. This is the Dermacol Makeup cover, and this has been really the only thing I went to for spot concealing, for under eye concealing for years. So as you can see, this shade, this is in the shade 8. So as you can see here, this is the Dermacol in the shade 208. It actually looks a little darker on me than I'm used to. I haven't used it in a little bit, but I think I could still get away with using this on my under eyes. I also have the shade 207, but that is darker, and we will swatch it when we come to the spot concealing section. But I wonder if they have any lighter shades. I'm gonna have to look into something lighter if I want to continue using this to like brighten my under eyes and not just conceal. But I've never swatched it right next to the MAC N4 before. The MAC takes a little bit of time to warm up to the skin. As you can see, the swatch on this side looks a little bit more like blended into my skin, whereas this side, it looks very like stark. And this one is definitely more of like a warm kind of undertone. Next, I have a concealer that I used to love, and then their shade range, I basically became too pale for the shade range, so I couldn't use it. But Ulta, I don't know how recently they extended the shade range, but they did, and I was able to find something that worked for me. So this is the Ulta Full Coverage Concealer in the shade Fair Neutral. And I believe this is the lightest shade that they have. And this is the swatch right here. So actually looking at it, it looks very similar to the IT Cosmetics swatch here in person. I don't know what it looks on camera yet, but this actually works pretty well on my under eyes. I love the amount of product that you get. I like everything about this concealer, so I'm glad they extended the shade range enough for me to find one that actually worked for me. All right, next let's hop over to Cover FX. This is a bit of an older concealer now. I don't really hear people talking about it anymore, but this is the Power Play concealer. I took the stopper out because the stopper really prevented a lot of the stuff from coming out. So this is going to be a little bit of a thicker swatch. All right, so now we have the Cover FX Power Play here. Again, this is one that works best for me when I powder it down, so I have not been using it as much lately since I haven't been powdering my under eyes. But as a swatch, it leans a little bit warm and a little bit darker, but this still works on my under eyes. All right, next, bringing it down to the drugstore ones once more, I have the e.l.f. Hydrating Camo Concealer. I tried the regular camo concealer and it looked horrific on me. So the hydrating one is my go-to, and it actually is the lightest of these so far. And again, this is actually a really great product. I like it unset, I like it set with powder, and it just works really well. And last but not least, I have two concealers from Shop Miss A. I have the Flawless Liquid Concealer, and then I have the Locked Creamy Concealer. They're both in the shade L1. Yeah, L1, light one, the lightest shade that Shop Miss A carries. I'm going to put the Locked Creamy Concealer right up here. This one, formula-wise, I don't like as much as the other concealer. This one has been kind of like a new go-to for me. It feels higher end, which is kind of shocking to me because this is like $1. But back to the Locked Creamy Concealer. It works okay. It works decently. I'm not a huge fan of the formula itself. I just think with my fine lines, with my dark circles, it's definitely a lighter coverage than other concealers that I prefer. So I would not be reaching for this one unless I was really more so going for like that no makeup kind of look, which is typically not what I'm going for. But when I need something that's full coverage and looks great, this is the Flawless Concealer. And now this one's a little bit darker than the other one despite being the lightest of the concealer shade ranges, but this one is just so pretty. It blends out so nicely. It is full coverage. You can see right there. Obviously, I haven't blended it out yet, but it is a full coverage concealer, and it just looks beautiful. And I appreciate that we can have some great affordable options for concealer, because I remember back when I was first getting into makeup in like 2014, you couldn't find like any good concealer from the drugstore, and now you have like a ton of amazing affordable concealer options. So let's go through all the concealers on this side once more. So first we have our MAC Studio Fix Fluid Foundation in the shade N4. Next, we have our Dermacol Makeup Cover in the shade 208. Next, we have our Ulta Full Coverage Concealer in the shade Fair Neutral. Next, we have the Cover FX Power Play Concealer in the shade N Light 1. Next down here, we have the e.l.f. Hydrating Camo Concealer in the shade Fair Warm. Up here, we have the Shop Miss A AOA Studio Locked Creamy Concealer in the lightest shade L1. And last but not least, here in the middle, if I can point to it, we have the AOA Studio Flawless Liquid Concealer, also in the shade L1, the lightest shade. So again, out of all of these, they do look vastly different swatched out on my face like this. My favorites have been the Armani, and for like the more affordable side of things, the Shop Miss A Flawless one. So if we swatch those, I just kind of want to, just for my own edification, this is the Shop Miss A, and then this is the Armani. It just kind of surprises me how different swatches can look in a swatch as opposed to blended out on your face, but these have been kind of my favorite go-tos, and I love the way that I look right now. Time for a thumbnail. Alright, originally I was going to wash this off and then show you the concealers I use for spot concealing, but we can do those down here so that way you can see everything on my wonderful face, and we can go outside and then scare my neighbors because they already think I'm a little crazy. So once more, just for reference, I'm putting the MAC Studio Fix Fluid in the shade N4 right down here. Now I have to admit, I really don't spot conceal that much anymore. I would much rather like go in with a full coverage concealer, or I'd rather go in with a full coverage foundation than have to use a spot concealer. But sometimes I just get breakouts and there's just stuff I really want to cover, and honestly my go-to is Dermacol. So this is in the shade 207. And it is slightly darker than 208. That's like my pet peeve, is just like when brands come out with numbers for their shades, but like the numbers don't correspond with the lightness of the shade. Anyway, so it's not too far off, but it does oxidize a little bit. So that's why I can really only use this for spot concealing now and not on my under eye. So just to compare to the 208 over here, that's the Dermacol, and this is 207. So you can see 207 is noticeably darker. But Dermacol is like your like best go-to if you're looking for just bulletproof full coverage. You can use this as a concealer, you can use this as a foundation, you can use this as an eye primer. I panned one of these bad boys and it took me like a year. It took me a long time. Long time. So that is shade 207. And last but not least, I have the Bye Bye Dark Spots from IT Cosmetics, just in the shade 11 that I mentioned earlier. I bought this originally for my under eyes, but it is dark. I bought it because it's the lowest number in their shade range, but once more, it is not the lightest. So this one, I don't like returning makeup. I really don't. I don't like to see that kind of wastefulness, so if I can find a way to use it, I will use it that way. So I've been using this to spot conceal, especially because the ingredients and the marketing say that this contains ingredients that are supposed to help you eventually fade dark spots over time. So I do like to use this on like little spots that are left after acne, like down here I've got some over here by my eyebrow that have been pretty stubborn. But I try to use this. Typically I don't use this unless I'm doing like a full coverage, full beat kind of thing, because if you wear this like with a no makeup look, you're seeing it. So not the best shade match, but I'm just trying to find a way to use it. If I'm looking for like a good like my skin shade match, I'm using the Dermacol. So just to go through the spot concealers, we have the Studio Fix Fluid from MAC in the shade N4. We have the Dermacol Makeup Cover in the shade 207. And this is the IT Cosmetics Bye Bye Under Eyes in the shade 11, which is wild. That is so dark for a light shade from them. But it's not like IT Cosmetics is known for their shade range. Alright, I've got all that wiped off, so to finish this video, I just want to go through a couple of color correctors that I like to use for my under eyes. I don't go through like the whole 2013, 2014 color correct the entire face anymore, but I used to back when I first started, because that's like when Tarte had that entire color correcting palette, and heck, Stila, I've got the one right here, the entire color correcting palette. I just bought this because I was curious about the salmon color correctors, because that's what I use for my under eyes. Though I am now kind of experimenting with some other colors, mainly yellow, to help cancel out the dark circles I have under my eyes. So let me show you a few of the salmon ones that I've really been liking. First, the Becca and Smashbox originally was from Becca. Since Becca is no more, it is now Smashbox. So this is the under eye brightening corrector in the shade Fair Light. And this has been just kind of like my holy grail go-to. And I'm trying to blend it on top of the dark circle so you can get an idea of what it looks like. So not only is it like a really good just shade for my under eyes and my complexion in general, it just kind of blends right in. So I can get away sometimes using this without like any makeup. Like on a no makeup day, I can just pat a little bit of this on my under eyes and it just kind of evens out my complexion, and it sits really well on my skin. It doesn't sink into my fine lines. It doesn't get dry and cakey and flake off. It just looks really, really beautiful. Next, I have the Catrice kind of dupe for that product. So this is the Catrice Under Eye Brightener in the shade Light Rose 010. So this one, the shade I don't hate. It's a little bit brighter, so I couldn't wear this without makeup on top of it. But it's not my favorite formula. It's a little too, how do I say this? It's creamier, but it's like thinner. So while the Becca one over here, Becca and Smashbox one, it feels more like a, almost like a MAC paint pot in texture, and it just sits really, really nicely on my skin. The Catrice one is a little bit thinner. It's got a little bit less coverage, and it kind of moves around. So when I'm putting makeup on top of this, I've noticed that unless I put this on and let it sit, I almost have to set this with a powder before I go in on top of it with like my foundation and my concealer if I'm doing a full beat. So it takes a little bit more work. Like, it's cheaper, yes, but I definitely much prefer the Becca one. So not a huge fan, but the shade, like, if I had this shade in the Becca, I think it would actually work pretty nicely under makeup. All right, next we have from Stila. This is their Correct and Perfect all-in-one color correcting palette. And I'm just picking specifically the two peach and pink shades in here. So peach is right over here, pink is over here. And they do have some powders, and I don't like the fact that they mixed powders and creams in here because you kind of have to separate them, but at least they do separate them. So I'm going to take the peach shade first. We'll do it right over here. So this one is, it's supposed to be like an all-in-one palette, and I think they only have one colorway for this, so this is way too dark for me, quite honestly. Unless I'm doing a full beat, and even then, I can see it underneath my concealer, and it doesn't really look the best. However, the pink, I'm gonna move over to this side now. Pink is actually a pretty nice match. It looks pretty similar to the Catrice color, but this one is a little bit thicker. And I'm just going to pat it out a little bit so you can see what it looks like right there. It's not terrible. It's not my favorite just because of how inconvenient it was. I almost wish they had just packaged that pink one individually, so then we can move on. So that is the Stila. And then, you know, I barely use the yellow in this one, but I'm going to also swatch the yellow from Stila. And then to round this out, I've got two color correctors from the Ulta lines. These are just the color correcting concealers in pink and yellow. Yeah, pink, rose, and yellow. So I'm going to swatch the yellow one first. And as you can see, it is very yellow. So this is one where, you know, you only use a little bit of it and you fully tap it out and you let it set all the way before you go in with your makeup. But I've noticed that this yellow color corrector works amazing on my under eyes, especially on days where, like, I've been extra stressed this year and sometimes there's been nights where I really don't get a whole lot of sleep. So that's when I go for this one. It just makes me look a lot more bright and awake the next morning. And then I'm just going to scrape off a little bit. I've got the pink from Ulta. Now, I will say I like the yellow color corrector from Ulta a lot better than the pink one. I don't know what it is about the formula, but I feel like the formulas are not the same between the pink and the yellow. So this pink one, I definitely don't reach for really much at all. I'm probably going to declutter it in my next declutter because I much prefer the salmon, more creamy ones than this kind of liquid color corrector. So to go through all the color correctors that I have on my face, starting over here, you can barely see it anymore, but this is the Becca and Smashbox color corrector. This is the Catrice under eye corrector. These two shades I have right here are the salmon and the pink color correctors from the Stila Correct and Perfect palette. Over here I also have the yellow color corrector from the Stila palette. And then over here I have yellow and pink from the Ulta color correcting concealer line. So that is it. Those are all of my current kind of like reference concealers that I have, along with my color correctors. So let me know if you guys found this helpful down below. I'm also working on a sequel to the best foundation matches video, but I just need some time, like outside of work. Work has been nuts this year, but I need some time to actually go through my foundation drawer and swatch everything and look at the foundations I used in the last video so I don't have any over repeats. But sometime, I'll say by the end of this year, I will have a sequel to the foundation one. And if you guys like this, maybe after my no buy is over, I can go out and buy the other concealers I wanted to include in this video, which were originally 1 or 2 MAC concealers, just to compare the MAC concealer shades to the foundation shades. And then there were some new higher end ones that I was looking at, but I never actually picked up. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I cannot wait to see you in my next video. Bye.